Hey guys, Fox here, and today it is time to do my playoff predictions for the 2024 United Football League postseason. Yes, it has taken a while, but we finally know the home field advantage situation for all these teams, so we can finally do an actual prediction on the playoffs. Now, this is probably the toughest of the ultramodern spring football, era. That's because, especially from this past week, it's pretty hard to look at any of these teams being really that much better than each other. No matter what games they've been between each other, even if you go for the championship matchups, they've all been insanely close. Really, like that Michigan San Antonio game was the biggest blowout, and even then it wasn't even a blowout. It was just, the Brahmas did win by a decent margin. So when you look at it, all these teams are really close, especially because at this exact moment, teams like the Stallions don't really look all that good. Teams like the Brahmas look to be insanely injured. So this is a tough one, and I think that you could really make an argument for any team to win, but I'm going to give it my thoughts. So without further ado, let's get started with the USFL Conference Championship game. Now, the preview we saw this past week, the big one was Marcus Sims did not play for Michigan. That was the biggest storyline for either team. Birmingham didn't look good. Again, it was their third game without John Chavis, their defensive coordinator, who was, gone for the season at this point because of, health concerns and him probably retiring, but we don't know for sure. Yeah, it didn't look good, but at the same token, Michigan didn't really do a lot. Yes, they could have won the game if Bates made the last second field goal, which I know shockingly he did end up missing. But overall, it was one of those games where it was just pretty hard to look at either team and say, yeah, one of these teams is super dominant. Now, the home crowd is probably going to be much bigger than it was this past weekend, which will be a huge help for Birmingham. But the question is, of course, whether Marcus Sims will be back or not. And I know it might be a cop-out, but I feel like having Sims back could potentially change the tide of who wins that game. Especially because the other question mark is exactly who is playing at QB for Nolan. Did Nolan purposely use Etling for most of the game to give the Stallions a false sense of, oh, Etling is going to start? Or did he put in Perkins for that, little bit of time just to get him some action so that he can play next week as the starter? That is a legit question. While I would assume it's probably Danny who's going to start, I wouldn't be shocked if it's Bryce. Essentially, if Bryce Perkins ends up starting and Sims ends up playing, I do think Michigan probably wins that game. If Sims plays and Etling starts, they have a shot. But the fact that I have to rely on Sims being healthy and COC Mariner being fully healthy, he was a bit banged up after this past week. If both those guys are healthy, Michigan stands a really good shot at beating Birmingham. Because without Sims, COC has really become like that one guy, that number one guy for the team. And so when you bring back Sims, you'll have two number one guys. But considering the fact that I need those things to all happen for Michigan, I'm going to pick Birmingham to win it. I think that in the end, you have to look at the team that is overall just better. And I feel like this is the toughest game for Birmingham. I really believe that if they win this game, they go on to win the championship. This is the toughest game they have because this is the game where their momentum just doesn't exist. I mean, you barely won against Michigan. Your team looked awful throughout the entire day. And really, when you go back to that, week 9 game against, or week 8 game against Houston, it hasn't looked good for Birmingham. I mean, their defense has been looking really shaky. Their overall offense hasn't been the same, especially since the Houston game. But if they pull off this win, this will be that win that'll get you all your momentum back, because that means you're going back to the championship game for the third straight season. So I think that whether they play the Brahmas or Battlehawks, they'll easily win that. Well, I wouldn't say easily, but they'll probably win that game by a pretty decent margin. But they have to get past Michigan, which is what I don't know if they can do. Well, I do you can tell I'm picking them to win this game. But at the same token, it's one of those where it has to have a lot of things go their way. I don't think a fully healthy Michigan team will lose to the Stallions team. And I say that because of the fact that we just saw what Michigan did this past week. And when you look at how Michigan has been overall on the upswing, whereas Birmingham's been on the downswing, yes, Michigan lost, but they were missing guys. And for Michigan, they do have that extra boost to play for. We don't know exactly the deal with how Frank Gidna's health is doing, but remember, he technically could return for the championship game. So Panthers players know that if they win this game, they could get their defensive leader back. But I have to go with Birmingham. I just think that objectively they are the better team still. There are massive question marks on their defense, but I don't expect their offense to play this bad again. I expect Holtz to get, the offense, Martinez and all them to understand, hey, this past week wasn't good. Were you holding plays and hiding them for this game? We don't know. But at the end of the day, when I look at it, if they were to play 100 times, I think Birmingham wins probably 60 of them. I don't think this is one of those where Birmingham is clearly the better team and has a clear advantage being at home field. I feel like this is one of those where it's heavily dependent on how healthy Michigan is versus how good Birmingham actually is. Now, as for the XFL Conference Championship, we have the Brahmas versus the Battlehawks. The Battlehawks do get home field advantage, and so we all are expecting there to be well over 35K people there. And as for the Brahmas, this is a tough one. Look, at the end of the day, the Brahmas had it's a double-edged sword kind of deal. Because on one end, it looks really bad for St. Louis, how they won this past weekend. But at the other side, it looks really bad for San Antonio. Look, San Antonio had this game won, and they had a bunch of crucial mistakes. They had the ineligible man downfield. They had a receiver drop a pass that was in both his hands. Yes, Dormaday's throw could have been better, but it was still in both his hands. You're supposed to catch that, and he dropped it. Both those made it to where they needed to get a last-second field goal. And even though they were able to just completely hold St. Louis after a great first down play, they just had back-to-back great plays on St. Louis. And in the end, though, Ryan Santoso had his kick miss. Yes, it was technically blocked, but at the end of the day, both the kicks that he had blocked were those type of kicks where a kicker like a Jake Bates doesn't get those blocked. And I mean that in a sense that, Santoso doesn't have the legs some of the other kickers do, and he has to kick really low. And we saw that especially at halftime when he was kicking like the 50-yarder, and he had to kick a super low kick, and it got blocked. So there were 6 points left on the board, technically 8 when you count 2-point conversion left on the board for San Antonio. San Antonio was the better team overall, yet lost, and that was their best shot at beating St. Louis, I believe. Look, they were missing their 2 best running backs, and despite what some people might say, that is a big deal. Those 2 guys, the reason Lovett and McFarland are so good is because of the few touches they get, they make count. They did that both the past couple weeks in McFarland and Lovett. There's a reason why he still is in the top rushing yards, because he is the guy that does get the kind of most down carry back. But at the end of the day, yes, the Brahmas will be healthier against St. Louis, but McCarron will probably be more healthy as well. We don't know exactly how banged up he is after the game, but there's no way he's going to be that much worse. And of course, you have the issue of Chase Garbers. Chase Garbers probably won't play. If he does, he'll be playing through an injury as well, as he got re-hurt in his wrist. So it's just one of those things where the Brahmas, just like early in the season, are getting injured at a terrible time. Losing Destroying has proved, because the whole reason you kept Destroying and was going to have him as a kicker was because he had a powerful leg, and now the kicker you currently have doesn't have that. And even before that, Santoso was already considered the worst kicker in the league, and now it's very clearly he is the weakest kicker in the league. You're starting Quinton Dormaday, who, if you were to view the current starters, is one of the weakest in the league, barring that Garbers ends up being healthy enough to play. And you'll have 2 running backs who, especially McFarland, will be playing through injury. I'm going with St. Louis. St. Louis wins this game. Look, a fully healthy San Antonio team yesterday does beat St. Louis, and I don't even think it's that close a game. But when you're talking about a playoff game in St. Louis, with all those fans and with AJ being healthier, I don't know. Look, the Brahmas defense is not going to have, and this is the reason. I expected and knew that game yesterday was going to be a low-scoring defensive battle. Everything around it had those signs of it. In a low-scoring game, both teams fully healthy, the Brahmas win that every time. The issue is, there's no way it's going to be that way again this upcoming week. It's going to be more of a shootout, and a shootout is where the Brahmas cannot compete in. They've already gotten in shootouts and lost this season. That's where they lose games, right? The game against St. Louis was a more higher scoring one earlier in the season, and they lost it. They're not built to, put up 30 points. They're built to win by scoring like 20 and holding the opponent to under 15. So when you're talking about having just faced them, there's no way the defenses are going to play this good again. We're not going to see that ugly of a first half from both teams. So when you're talking about this being a more higher scoring game, I just don't see any way where the Brahmas can win that game. And I know there's a lot of Brahmas fans going to be upset at that, but I don't see how you beat St. Louis in a shootout, especially if you're playing injured running backs and Quinton Dormaday, who's a very sketchy QB. I just don't see it. Could you be healthier than I expect? Maybe. Did you potentially not have guys practice to make them fully healthy? Maybe. Maybe you're playing 4D chest. But again, we saw questionable play calling from AJ Smith this past week. We saw a game that was very winnable that you lost. And because of all that, I have to go with St. Louis. St. Louis wins this game at home because it's probably going to be a shootout, and they're built to win shootouts. San Antonio isn't. That's the difference. St. Louis, for the very minor issues they have, one thing that isn't an issue is them being multidimensional. They can win a close, low-scoring game because of their defense, and they can win a shootout because of their offense. San Antonio can only really win a close defensive game, and a shootout is where they struggle at. So because of that, St. Louis, I have them getting the W. Then for the championship game between the Stallions and Battlehawks, the rematch of the two heavyweight teams, both looking much weaker than they did when they met a few weeks ago. Look, this is a very tough one to call in some ways because, of course, St. Louis will have a huge crowd. I mean, people legitimately think there's a chance it'll hit over 50, maybe 60K if they are in the championship game. And it's one of those things where it is a tough call. But as I kind of alluded to earlier, I do have the Stallions winning this. I don't want to, hold you. I mean, I did kind of clearly say that I think Birmingham wins the championship if they get there. Because at that point, both teams are going to be riding on momentum. And it's going to be one of those things where it's just which team is overall better. When you look at them as an overall sense, I just have to go with Birmingham. Look, Birmingham beat St. Louis last time by a decent, not really by a decent margin, but they clearly were the better team that day. Both teams made mistakes, but if they both didn't make mistakes, Birmingham would have still won that game. And I look at it now and I just say, exactly aside from home field advantage, what can I really say about St. Louis that says, yeah, they'll win? At the end of the day, both teams have incredible receiving cores, a great QB, but if they're both playing good, because of course, this past week, AJ was a bit shaky. Was it because of the leg? Exactly how much of it was because of the leg? Martinez hasn't looked himself, but both QBs at their peak this season, Martinez has been better. Both receiving cores at their peak have both been incredible, though Hakeem is definitely the best receiver of all of them. Running backs, all of the running backs have had their times where they've looked okay and looked great. If they're all playing at full cylinders, though, it's pretty hard to go against Person and Maribel, especially since Maribel has done this before in championship games versus, guys like Sailors and Gallman. Defense, both defenses are really good. I said the Battlehawks defense was criminally underrated heading into this past week, but at the end, it's going to be a matter of exactly how much better the defense is going to be getting with Chavis gone, because the defense is not the same as it was. But if it can get a little bit better, especially by beating Michigan again, I mean, they still have the talent to say that they're better than St. Louis, but because of the whole defensive scheme, defensive coordinator, it's hard to say that the Birmingham D is currently better than St. Louis. It'll be close. But at the end of the day, I think that Birmingham is a team that I trust their head coach more in a championship-style game. Birmingham's a team I trust more in a championship setting. They have many guys that have won championships in this level. I'm not talking about any level. In this level, spring football. They have a bunch of guys who have won at least one, some of them 2 championships at this level. When you have guys like that, I just think that that's the kind of marginal victory you need, and I think that's why Birmingham will win. I think they're better suited to play in a awful home crowd. I say awful home crowd in the sense that, you're the visiting team, and you're going against a massive group. But I feel like they're the team that if any of them's going to play well in that situation, in that atmosphere, it's going to be them. They're going to be the more disciplined team than really any other team. And so because of that, I do have Birmingham winning this game. I think Birmingham does win the UFL championship and finishes their three-peat. So let me know down below what you guys think, who the playoffs are going to go. What are your picks? As I said before, I might change the Michigan Stallions pick when I do my game picks later in the week, only if it becomes very clear that everybody's healthy and I genuinely think that Michigan will win that. But I don't know. And then in terms of just some quick matchups, I think for championship matchups, I think Michigan beats St. Louis if that ends up being the championship game. I think Michigan loses to San Antonio if that's the championship matchup. I think San Antonio is that team that's built very similarly to Michigan, and even with Gidna back, I think that San Antonio would beat Michigan in a championship game. And I do think that Birmingham would also win the rematch against San Antonio. That would be how I kind of view it in terms of an overall sense. But again, that's saying that everybody's pretty much healthy. That's how I'd view it. Fully healthy Michigan team beats the fully healthy St. Louis team just because their matchup is really well against them. As you can see, I had Birmingham beat St. Louis. I think San Antonio loses to Birmingham but does beat Michigan. That would be kind of how I view it. Let me know what you guys think down below, what your predictions are, though, and do you agree with who I think would win championship matchups, like a matchup table, kind of? And as always, this has been Zomfox. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified as soon as I upload any videos. If you've been a fan of the channel for a while, think about becoming a channel member for as low as 99 cents a month. You get an exclusive video, multiple team emojis, bunch of other stuff. And as always, guys, have a great night.